This is Ottawa's home for breaking news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. News Talk 580 CFRA. Here is Lowell Green.
Good morning. Anything you want to talk about this morning, lines are wide open. I want to make that very clear, that whatever it is you want to talk about, we can talk about it on this program, but you've got to let me know. Because let's be very honest, the major issue on just about everybody's lips remains the so-called refugee crisis. Where are they all coming from? Who exactly are they? Is it true that most of those trying to get into Europe are young males? How many should Canada accept? Is the Canadian government dealing with this in a proper fashion? Do we have anything to fear from an influx of Syrian refugees? Those are just some of the questions and concerns that are crossing my desk this week and again this morning. All of those concerns, all of those questions are legitimate. I believe we have every reason to be very careful here. As George Jonas writes in the Post this morning, quote, "The whole of the miserable, mismanaged, tyrannized, and overpopulated world cannot transfer to a handful of civilized and prosperous countries in Western Europe or North America. It is not a question," he says, "of selfishness or racism. It is just a physical impossibility. Accepting refugees for humanitarian reasons is a Band-Aid solution," he says. It's fine, just as a Band-Aid is fine, but only a charlatan would offer a Band-Aid as a substitute for open-heart surgery. He suggests that the heart surgery he refers to is to fight those responsible for the refugee crisis, ISIL. And there's another concern being expressed to me and to others, not just on my show here on CFRA, but increasingly in the homes and offices of the nation. That is the manner in which the so-called mainstream media is dealing with this. The bias becomes more obvious every day, and I believe more dangerous. Yesterday, many of you expressed anger at Post Media, the Ottawa Citizen in particular, for carrying a story of a survey done which implied that somehow the Harper government was in some way responsible for the drowning death of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi. The survey claimed that fully 44% of Canadian population did not think Harper had handled that situation, the situation regarding the Abdullah Kurdi family, properly. Most callers to my show agreed the question was totally misleading and intended to embarrass the Conservative government. I had a very heated debate during yesterday's program with the head of the polling company which had conducted the survey. A survey carried in most, if not all, post-media newspapers, widely reported, radio and television right across the country. During the interview that I had with the head of the polling firm called Main Street Technologies, the head of that is a man named Keto Maggie. He admitted to me, and you heard, that the survey was carried out during the past weekend, long after we knew that the reports the Abdullah Kurdi family had been turned down by the Harper government were totally, absolutely, utterly false. Almost all segments of the mainstream media, even including the CBC, admitted this family had never made an application to come to Canada. I made it very clear during my interview with Keto Maggie that I believed his survey, and in particular the question concerning the Kurdi family, was misleading and biased, intended to embarrass the Harper government. Well, guess what, folks? I've done my homework, which apparently Post Media did not. I've done my research, and what did I find? Well, I found that Keto Maggie, head of Main Street Technologies, is a leading, very well-known, very controversial liberal. In fact, Keto Maggie, head of Main Street Technologies, was the campaign manager for Liberal candidate Grant Humes during the November 26, 2012 by-election in Durham Region. That particular election campaign was very controversial, with the Liberal tactics offending many veterans. Hume, by the way, was defeated badly by Conservative Aaron O'Toole. Let me read you very briefly from a column written by Chris Hall on the DurhamRegion.com website, a website, by the way, that is part of the Metroland media empire. Quote, a candidate's decision to link his roadside election signs with Canadian war veterans has some local Legion members up in arms. Red and white signs sporting the Liberal logo and a large silhouette of a Canadian soldier began popping up along Durham roadways recently, just weeks ahead of the November 26 by-election in Durham riding and days before Remembrance Day. They do not mention Liberal candidate Grant Humes by name, but urge people to visit a website called durhamforvets.org, which contains information and propaganda about the Humes campaign. Liberal campaign manager Keto Maggie makes no apologies for this. The idea, he says, is to highlight a need to change the government, unquote. So let's lay it on the line, okay? Post media must have known bloody well that Mainstream Technologies was being run by a leading Liberal who makes no bones about his desire to defeat the Harper government, but despite this, they contracted Main Street to conduct what is supposed to be and reported to us as an unbiased poll. To sum up, post-media newspapers, including the Ottawa Citizen, hire a leading, well-known, controversial Liberal to conduct what is supposed to be an unbiased poll, which, surprise, surprise, indicates that nearly half the Canadian population believes the Harper government is at least partially responsible for the death of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi on a turkey speech. Folks, if ever you needed proof of media bias in this country, there it is. And by the way, I have asked the Citizen editor, Mr. Potter, if he would care to comment, that I would be only too happy to grant him all the time to comment that he needs. What do you think of this? You know, if we cannot trust our media to tell us the truth, the whole truth, then who can we trust? 521-8255. Lines are open. If there's anything else you want to talk about, it's up to you. 521-8255. And in that regard, both the NDP and the Liberals not only want to bring in far more so-called refugees from Syria, but they want to remove some of the screening barriers that the Conservative government has imposed. In particular, a rule which states that the United Nations Commission for Refugees or another country must first designate a person as a refugee before immigration officials here will consider letting that person into Canada if it is privately sponsored. The rules apply only to refugees being sponsored privately by a group of 5 or more persons. They are called G5 applications. Both the NDP and the Liberals say, if elected, they will exempt Syrian refugees from that provision, but will not commit to abolishing the G5 rules for other refugee claimants, which indicates to me they must feel there is some validity. What's your view of all of this? Increasingly, there is a growing rumble of concern in Europe and elsewhere that many of the so-called refugees are not really refugees at all, but simply large groups of mostly young men seeking better employment and better benefits. Most of the young men, who comprise about 80% of the so-called refugees, appear to be well-fed, they have money, they have iPhones, and are well-dressed. What are your observations? And do you think that this is the time to not only allow in large numbers of Syrian so-called refugees, but to lower the screening at the same time? What's your view of this whole terrible situation and the manner in which the government, the mainstream media, and everyone is dealing with it? What do you think is really going on here? 521-8255. We'll be back. CFRA.